My suggestion, if there are no follow-up questions of this, we drop into the agenda item discussion on the Science Board's statutory duty to comment on the Delta Plan and the briefing memo that's there. What is it, number 6, I guess it is? We have 2 of these discussions. This Science Board role regarding the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, and then separately the habitat restoration report, in general, how to deal with habitat restoration reports. Hopefully, we can get through this first. We've kind of traded dates and times, but it's it's not just the precise details, it's really more the practical difficulties you're having and what you'd like to tell us about the process. We understand the timetable is complicated, never long enough. The BDCP, we think, is now going to exceed 27 or 28,000 pages of reports, which must cause you heartburn every time you think about it. But, those are kind of, they're like the fires and floods and nature, the natural disasters of policy life. I'm interested in what you think the council could do to help you discharge your duties and develop the best possible information for us and for the public.
So towards that end, I think now, so Dan, you're going to comment on you're going to walk us through the plan. Dick Norgard has been our champion on BDCP review, and even though he stepped away for a while as chair, we're not letting him step away from that. So we had a call yesterday with Dick and myself and several staff members and with Arcadis to talk about sort of the upcoming need and the time schedule. So,
yeah, as Chris mentioned, the current schedule for review of the BDCP calls for a public release of the draft BDCP and its EIR/EIS on December 13th. Administrative drafts of various versions of them have been out in various forms over the last couple of years, and many of you had a chance to review portions of those. And of course, we've been getting briefings here from the Department of Water Resources, Natural Resources Agency, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife, largely based on the draft plan, on the admin draft plan. So now, December 13th, the public review drafts will come out, and they'll kick off the formal review periods. I wanted to talk about our roles in the review of the BDCP and then the approach we hope to take working together with the ISB and the science program. Obviously the BDCP is key to us. It helps to successfully resolve important problems in the Delta, both the system and reliability of water supplies. If it's approved, the BDCP is going to be incorporated in the Delta plan and become part of the responsibility that we as a council have to oversee, and that you all in the ISB will be evaluating the efficacy of its adaptive management program. So it's really important to us that we understand what's going on and that we have a program that's going to be effective and that we're prepared to carry out the roles that are assigned to us as it's reviewed. The Delta Reform Act identifies the council's first role as being a responsible agency for review of the DECP's EIR, and ISP also is tasked by the Reform Act with reviewing the EIR/EIS. In addition, as the BDCP is developed, the law calls for the Department of Water Resources to consult with both the council and with the ISB through the development process. In addition, the ISB, because this is become an element of the Delta plan, it has independent authority to review the plan to make sure that it's like other elements of the Delta plan based on the best available science. Importantly, we have a unique function that's been granted to us actually by the science program's effectiveness in doing these peer reviews. The Bureau of Reclamation has entered into an agreement with the science program to host the effects analysis peer review, and this is an august panel of folks with a great deal of experience in these matters from around the nation. We'll be reviewing a chapter in the DSC, a long chapter, the effects analysis that actually provides the scientific rationale about why the BDCP's conservation measures are expected to be effective in achieving the goals of restoring the ecosystem and recovering the species that are targeted in the BDCP. And also outlining the uncertainties within that scientific rationale. Where are they really confident, not so confident? And that's important because it helps us understand both how likely is this to be successful, what are the impacts on fish and wildlife likely to be, and also helps us understand the adaptive management program then, because that's the adaptive management process is all about understanding how we can narrow those uncertainties and become more effective over time and better be able to predict the outcomes of the project. Ultimately, if the Department of Fish and Wildlife approves the BDCP, it can be appealed to the council, and the council will be reviewing it to see if it comports with the requirements of the Reform Act. Does it meet the requirements of the Environmental Quality Act, including the unique requirements about the contents of the BDCP, CIR that are outlined in the Water Code, as well as does it comply with all the provisions of the National Communities Conservation Planning Act, California's Endangered Species Act. We've shared those requirements with y'all in previous memos. And then, as I said, finally, if it is approved, not just here in California, but if it's also approved by the federal fisheries agencies under the Federal Endangered Species Act, then it will be incorporated into the Delta Plan and will be responsible for its oversight as we are for other elements of the Delta Plan. So because of these combination of responsibilities, we've been trying to be involved throughout the process of BDCP development, really with two ideas in mind. One, it's really important to us that it work. Obviously, our goals are have a more reliable water supply, recover the ecosystem, do it in a way that respects the delta's enduring values as a place. And so we've been actively consulting with DWR and reviewing interim documents to make sure we've got some understanding of those issues. And then also we're trying to make sure that we understand how carefully the plan comports with the requirements that we may be required to test on appeal. And so we're working very carefully to understand what those legal requirements are, and then to examine areas where the BDCP does a very good job of showing how it complies with those requirements, and areas where maybe some more attention would be helpful. As we approach this review period, we've got 120 days. That's the duration of the review period. And that's sort of in the middle range of what you might expect. Shortest period that could be allowed under California law would be 45 days. The maximum period under the National Environmental Policy Act, if I understand, it's 180 days. So this is kind of right in the middle. It's going to be challenging to complete the review during that period. But we know on the other side of it, there's, we had a little report just now about the crisis in water supplies and the decline in the pelagic organisms in the delta. So we all know that we can't keep, fiddling while Rome burns here. We've got to move on. The Delta Plan itself sets a target of having the BDCP completed and ready for approval by December of 2014. And so we, among others, are trying to push the BDCP staff ahead to move this to a decision as promptly and efficaciously as possible. So we've tried to understand how we can operate within that 120-day period, and wanting to make sure that as we're considering the review, we're meeting the needs of both the ISB and the council to carry out the job that you have in terms of consulting with the Department of Water Resources and reviewing the EIS, because ultimately these next set of comments, previously we as a staff have sent in comments on, at least for the council, on the EIR and the EIS, but we want to make sure that in this go-around it's the council itself that's saying, yeah, these are the things that we think need attention, and these are the areas where we want to provide additional information. Those two roles are laid out in attachment 2 to the staff report. And it's a little spreadsheet that shows who's doing what and what the products in the review, who's doing what the review products would be, and then how they fit together, both to make sure we're understanding how well the project's likely to work, and how they respond to the legal requirements that are in the Reform Act. And we've got three parties that are able to assist with that work. The council's retained Arcadis, an international water resources consulting firm, as its independent consultant to assist us with review of the DECP. Our staff resources to work on this are limited, and so we really rely on Arcadis' assistance. The ISB has an important role, and then we have this independent panel that will be reviewing the effects analysis. And so we've tried to show that in this spreadsheet that each of these different elements of the review bind together are going to help us understand the overall, how well the DECP responds to both our interest in making sure the plan is going to work and making sure that it fully addresses the requirements of the Reform Act. As I said, the 120-day period is going to be pretty tight. One of the things that makes the period especially challenging is that this effects analysis, which is so important for many of us to understand how well the program is going to work. The effects analysis in some ways needs to be aligned with the EIS's forecast of impacts to fish and wildlife. So for many reviewers, that's going to be important to their consideration of those issues. Other folks, some people on the council may remember that last month Melinda Terry from the North Delta Water Agency was here speaking about a task that she had undertaken to actually align the effects analysis forecast of physical changes in the environment that were likely to benefit the covered species. She was aligning that with the EIS's analysis of environmental impacts and questioning whether, how come the effects analysis says there's going to be these changes in water levels, but the EIS doesn't identify the related changes that might occur in the efficacy of people's irrigation cycles or the impacts on recreational boating marinas and channels become 6 inches shallower. So there's a lot of folks that are interested in the effects analysis. And both the ISP and the council staff had asked that its review be completed 90 days before the public comments on the EIS would be due. That would require a 180-day review period rather than 120 days that's been allocated. And so we've been trying to examine how we can create some workarounds that would help people understand what the panel's likely to be including, even if we don't have their finished report in hand. And so I think what we're going to be able to do is, just as we do with these council meetings, webcast the independent panel's meeting in January, where they'll be discussing the report and kind of daylighting key concerns they may have about it. And that would be available for not just ISB members to review, but all members of the public as well. And so even though the finished report probably from the panel might not be available until early March, the opportunity we hope to watch the panel's deliberations over a simulcast process in earlier mid-January. We hope that can create a suitable workaround. We'll be monitoring the process, and I think our conclusion is that for now we suggest we not ask for additional extension of the review period, but we will monitor the process and see if more time is required. So we've tried to figure out ways in which Arcadis' review can be of help to the ISB as well as meet the needs of the council. And that's the approach we hope to use as we move ahead.
Supervisor Rusco.
I hope I got all the buttons pushed. Okay. In your report it says that this is a mid-range of the potential EIR review period. Would you say that this report is in the mid-range of length? Well, or complexity? Because that's been our comment all along is it's great you release this during the holiday period so you can kiss 2 or 3 weeks goodbye. And so you're giving us 120, but you're probably really not giving us 120. So I'm not beating you up. I just said, when I was looking at this and read it, I just said, what's the rush to judgment? the Independent Science Board, you're asking for them to give you a good report, but could you give it to us in a day and a half? That's I just think, why do we always push kind of to the limit, and then if you're actually trying to get a quality response that you really want, that you will incorporate into this, why don't you give people enough time to do it? I mean, that's...
Yeah.
Good point.
Well, I think a thing to recall, though, is that, it's not like this is going to be a dramatically different document from the one we saw, last April. And it's not that one we saw in April was not too dissimilar from ones that were seen previously. So I think we're feeling that, this is a review that we can complete within the period that we have now. I don't know how well prepared other agencies are, and I know for small organizations and local governments, this is a big burden. I was trying to think back to early in my career being involved in review of the environmental impact statements for the offshore oil and gas leases that were proposed on California in the 80s. And I know those came in with volumes like this too. But we were able to complete our reviews during the periods that were allowed, and I don't know if it was 120 or 180 days, but I think it's a process that can work. We didn't set the schedule. We're just trying to figure out how we can work with it.
One of the things that we asked for in earlier reviews that would help the fact that it's 27,000 pages is a decent summary at the beginning of each chapter that gives us a sense of what is going on. Do you know if that will be a part of it? I mean, because for me, if that's not there, then it is an unreasonable period of time. And I really agree with the supervisor. This is not a moderate, mid-range size of a report. And those summaries are going to be critical to our ability. I mean, because, we have assignments for individual chapters to be dealing with, but those chapters have to fit into the whole, and there's no way I can read 27,000 pages. And so those summaries are critical. Are they going to be there? Do you know?
I don't know.
If they're not, I think that we have some legitimacy for arguing for a longer period of time. So there.
Yeah, I don't want to just jump on the bandwagon, but I will.
You're going to do the grammar of them.
How am I going to look for split infinitives in 27,000 pages?
Peter will help you.
I think it's correct that there have been versions out there that we have looked at. We have also encountered substantial problems with those earlier versions. So it's not as if we're going through this just to see if there have been some tweaks that have taken care of that. I think it requires that we really re-review things to see whether, in fact, when push comes to shove, this really meets the scientific integrity requirements that we are charged with policing, in a sense. And we can talk tomorrow when we get into the nuts and bolts of how we're going to operationally go about this. Obviously, we're not going to be looking at each of the 27,000 pages in great detail. But at the same time, we've seen enough to know that there are very few spots in what we have seen so far that would be labeled synthesis of any kinds of information. So it's going to be a sampling problem in a sense. I guess I'm just adding my voice to those who are arguing for a reasonable but more deliberative evaluation of what is going on.
And I wanted to go back to what you said, Dan, in response to Judy's question about whether the summaries will be there. If, in fact, we don't know now, and it's going to be out in 3 weeks, isn't it safe to assume that those summaries are not going to be there? Because we've made this request pretty strongly several times that we would like to see
I
that.
don't know that, I'm not on the inside of the BDCP agencies are not sharing drafts of EIR with us, as they're reworking them. We've had very little interaction with them as they've dealt with the comments we offered and you offered on the administrative draft. My expectation is that we'll see some things that have improved and we'll be able to say, hey, that's great, thanks a lot. And we'll see other things where we go, gee, we told you in 2010 and 2011, we're telling you again now, you're still not there. This is a draft. They're expecting comments. There's some things, they had a relatively short period between the time the comments on the administrative draft were received and the time they forwarded this public draft EIS to their federal partners that posted in the Federal Register. And so I suspect they did the best they could with the time they had responding to the comments that they received. And some of that they'll have done really well, and some other things we'll say, you know what, before the final's done, make sure you address this, that, and the other. And we'll just have to see how they do.
I think for us, the strong requirement for those summaries that make some sense that allow us to grapple with it as a whole, we can't ask for that in the final draft. We need to have that in a draft that we're actually reviewing. So that's, I think, Judy, I think you're exactly right, we've been real strong about asking for that. And it would be really nice to know if that's going to be attempted. And I'm somewhat worried that it's not. Jay?
Yeah, just to add to the chorus, I know it's not your responsibility, but if you don't have a summary of this kind of document and the sections of this kind of document, not only is it hard to see how the pieces fit together, as Judy pointed out, but it's hard to have a lot of confidence that the people that wrote it knew what they were talking about. Because as a scientist, I think one of the easiest ways for us to get a read on whether someone knows what they're talking about is, can you summarize it well?
I think, too, one of the other things, because of the sheer volume of the report, there are some things that, in terms of the instructions we've given to Arcadis, we're going to ask them to examine some issues almost on an audit basis. To say, hey, did they, check 10%, see if they got it right. If they did, we'll have a little more confidence the other 90% is on the right track, too. If we find that 10% glaring problems in the 10%, we may suggest there be additional, more intensive reviews before the plan is really finalized and proposed for adoption. So that's another way, I think, you might think about dealing with the sheer volume of it if you find you're not getting the kinds of summaries that you're after. Right.
Dan, on the effects analysis and the request to allow enough time after the Delta Science Program's review was completed, what was the response aside from, no, it's 120 days, that's it? Were there reasons given for disallowing a reasonable amount of time after that review would be completed? Well,
I think, again, this is a process that if you're one of the BDCP agencies, this planning process has been going on for more than a few years now. They've spent, by reports, several $100 million on planning. They feel the need to move forward to a decision because we've got serious problems that need to be addressed, and every year we wait, those problems become more and more critical. We've got work we're doing today with the interim restoration actions that are proposed under the biological opinions and the evaluation of the interim flow standards that are set in the BIOPS, this CAMP process that are tied to the DSC. And so to make sure that these actions are all aligned, it's important to get a decision. There's people who have to make the decisions in the Natural Resources Agency and in the federal agencies who are looking at their own terms of office and trying to make sure that there's some continuity in the decision-making process. So I think all those things add up, and I feel like, my impression when I've talked to the staff that are involved in this is they feel, hey, this is an ample time, given the documents have been out previously, to complete the review. I'm sure there'll be many others who are, as some of you are saying, hey, not enough, we need more time. But I think this is how they've chosen to slice the bacon.
I just have one suggestion. This may this will not solve concerns that have been raised, but to me it's important. The Science Board has submitted 3, 4, 5 comment letters, I forget what the documents were called, regarding BDCP. The Council has submitted 4 or 5 letters that constitute either responsible agency comments or something else on BDCP. Are we keeping track of all the questions that have been asked so that we can then say, well, in 2010 we said this, where in the documents is the response to this question? Because I don't, it's unfair really for us to expect the BDCP staff to spend, all of their time trying to figure out for us where it is. But I mean, it's not unfair for us to ask the question, Science Board, whatever the date it was, requested summaries of each chapter. So where the summaries are to be found. If they are not found, I mean, Dan, that to me is likely to be the very next letter within 30 days after the release of the draft plan, BDCP plan, that the Council would probably want to send off. Just, we ask these questions, just tell us where the responses are that you think address the question. Not that it's not a question of did you accept our argument if there was an argument made, but just keep track of this stuff. Now that would be a useful matrix to see, to match up. Now, some of them are procedural questions. Important chapters or subject matters have to have a summary to be understandable, which I agree with. By the way, in fairness to BDCP, the Delta Plan struggled painfully to even explain it, and we're still struggling to explain it. And I've never met a governmental document program or private program that was capable of explaining itself simply until years after they've articulated it. But put that aside. The general plan of the County of San Joaquin is easily explainable. Yeah, right. No, but I mean, all these big complicated efforts are painful because the reality is, for the commenting world, whether they're scientists or just citizens or, governmental officials, everyone has their own list of problems and their own unique concerns and their own solutions, and they kind of want what they're commenting on to answer all the questions anybody's ever raised in any circumstance, which nothing can do. So I circle back again to Dr. Weitz. There's a point at which it's good enough. I don't know what that point is, but I do think that at least from our side of the equation and the desk asking the question, I want to make sure we keep track of the questions we ask and whether there's at least ostensibly an answer. Now, even if I disagree with the answer, that's different. There has to be at least an attempted answer somewhere. That's all.
One of the things we'll be doing probably early next week in anticipation of that is creating our own BDCP review webpage on our web system that'll list all the comments that the ISP, all the comments, letters that the ISP has sent, the comment letters that the Council has sent, and outline the review process.
Okay, but there too, unless we're changing what we're doing on our website, that will simply be jumps to 12 letters that total, 50 pages of material, and you expect someone to read it and draw it. And it's not the same as a table of contents, an index, a matrix. It's not the same for us. So we ought to, at a minimum, for our own questions, ought to attempt to do to our audience what we wish BDCP to do for us. Okay.
The other thing in terms of both the Council and the ISP, we're talking with the BDCP agencies about having them available to do a briefing about, at the ISP meeting in January, about key changes in the BDCP. It would be a time for them to highlight the responses that they've made to the comments you made previously. For the Council, we had hoped in December that their briefing would focus on what the EIR and the EIS say about the BDCP's environmental impacts within the Delta, sort of how is it affecting the delta as a place, and what are the mitigation measures that are proposed to try to reduce or offset those impacts. And then we'll continue that briefing series through the remaining months leading up to the council's review then of a draft letter of comment on the DCP documents at your March meeting, and with the possibility that if we needed to schedule an additional meeting for you to revise those comments and finally approve them, we would schedule a special meeting.
Supervisor Rostow.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to concur with Jay. If you write a report and you can't summarize it, there's something wrong there. I mean, you should be able to make this so, as you just said, the average person who's interested in this can actually have some knowledge of what's going on. So then that leads me into a part that you may be getting to, but I'm not familiar with the Arcadis contract, but I'm looking at the report, and it's $750,000, and I'm assuming they've used about $500,000 up so far, because it says they have 200 left in their contract, but then they're saying we need to increase their contract by another 200 grand. So we're pushing 900,000. Could these folks help us ask some of these questions or codify or bring this into clarity? Because
The consultant.
900 grand's a lot of money, and I'm not sure how much that is a page on this report to read, but summarize it, but...
Hey, sir, let me just give some history. When we were started up in the 2009 legislation, we began, we started in April of 2010 to organize. And we had a bunch of immediate things to do, including starting a Delta plan, the interim plan. The statute says you must adopt an interim plan, and didn't tell us what it was. There's some messy parts in that. So we hired up fast, and then there was a lot of criticism because our consultant on the Delta plan had done work before for the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, and you can't do that, so fire everybody and start. There were legislative hearings and so on. So we actually withdrew from that consultant any responsibility for dealing with the BDCP, and we independently sought consultants on BDCP that had never worked and would agree not to work for the Bay Delta Conservation Plan to advise us on those aspects of the problem. That's where we found Arcadis, which is a Dutch firm, but they have a strong California presence, and they just happened to be one of the few significant firms that had never been hired in this 7-year BDCP process. So they have been working with us in bits and pieces since 2010 on that, and we've been struggling to figure out, as the Science Board has, how do you deal with the questions? For the council, we told Arcadis fairly early on, they asked us, are you asking us to second guess every single solitary thing in there? And we said, look, the council was not given the statutory duty to decide whether the Bay Delta Conservation Plan was wise or a great political decision. It was given the statutory duty to determine whether it met the legal requirements imposed by the statute and complied with all the bells and whistles. Now, policy questions are clearly part of that, but we didn't want to re-engineer a big, complicated capital improvement project. So that then leads us to where we're now. Science Board and ourselves are struggling with Arcadis' help to try to define the problems and the questions. They pointed out to us clearly that many of the questions are legal questions for the council. That is, has BDCP met the requirements of law, as opposed to purely engineering or planning questions. That's where we are.
And they, I think, they have a team that's quite experienced, environmental analysts, water engineers, folks who've been involved in other large-scale water management programs in the Everglades and in coastal Louisiana elsewhere. They will be preparing an extensive report as well as a draft comment letter on the EIS, and we've tried to identify ways in which the analysis that they're doing can support the charge that you all have given to the Independent Science Board, so particularly focusing on the adaptive management program as a key piece. There's some things that Arcadis is going to be doing in terms of looking at the adequacy of the financial elements of the BDCP that I think can interact, for example, with the ISB, looking at how well the program is designed, so then we get both pieces of those coming together. And there'll be other ways that I think that kind of collaboration can occur. So I think we've got a great team there, and there'll be a lot of opportunity to share information as well as, again, getting an early understanding of what the results of the independent panel's work is going to say. So I think little by little we're going to be able to patch together the technical information we need.
Count Supervisor Rusteller is not quite satisfied with that answer. Phil?
Will it be done in time to allow everybody here? Will it help them? Or is it going to be sliding into home at about the same time that the BDCP is?
Yes. So we've asked Arcadis to be able to give us their work. They'll do some interim products that will be available to help the ISB. They've already done some work, I think, that can be helpful in terms of the work we did on the administrative draft EIR, which is a big chart of the charge for the ISB as well. They've not only prepared our own comment letter, which I think ran to 18 or so pages, but they also have reviewed the comment letters that the other agencies who released publicly their comments, the key comments that they made. So I think one thing we can do is we can help focus the ISB on, hey, here's some of the key issues that have been raised in reviews to date. The ISB is going to have to do some work on its own, obviously, and that's one of the reasons that they've been selected in the charge that they have. We've asked Arcadis to have their reports to us in time that they'll arrive at about the same time the ISB would be completing its work, in terms of their final reports. Then we could get you, as just the same schedule we would normally do with a normal item, get you draft comments on the BDCP that we could then give to you well in advance of the comment deadline, so that then you'd have a chance to consider them and revise those comments for us. And in addition, I think it's quite possible that the ISB would say, hey, here's a draft report for you all to consider, in mid-March sometime, and you all yourselves, as a board with your own authorities in statute, could extend your review to finalize your report until that mid-April deadline. So I think we can, watch how this works. Clearly, a lot is going to depend on the effects panel's report.
Dan, so I'm clear, the scientists here are telling us that they want a 180-day review period. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Science drives this, okay? A lot hangs in the balance. What are we leaving this on? Are we going to go back to resources and say we want 180 days, or are we just going to let it sit? What are we going to do? I mean, it seems to me, given this morning's discussion, it seems that we should listen to our scientists. This is so critical. They're saying we can't get this job done the way it should be done in 120 days. Then, damn it, we ought to go to the natural resources and say we need another 60 days. What is 60 days given what we're looking at in terms of BDCP? I don't understand what the argument is about.
If that was your choice, we'd be happy to convey that message. We had already asked them.
Well, we'll ask them again. You can ask questions a lot of different ways, and my suggestion is that we use all our tools at our resources and get those guys to give us 180 days. I mean, I don't know how long it's going to take, but the scientists say it's going to take, we need 180, then that's the way it ought to be. I think we can probably persuade resources. They're not the last word anyway.
Yeah. We like this guy. we like this guy. Judy and then John.
Thank you. That was very useful. But my specific comment was going to be, this table would be more useful to me and help me understand whether it's even feasible if there were dates associated with this. So you've been, like the draft letter from Arcadis and when you expect to have something from us. And so what are the dates associated? And then
we're right now completing the detailed scope with Arcadis, so we're still discussing, this week versus that week. We've generally worked out the
this schedule that would have them producing interim products that would intersect with your meeting dates, and then relying on your having a draft plan, a draft set of comments in early March, as well as them having a draft of their letter in March, so that then we would be able to present draft comments to the council, recognizing that you all would then have additional time to finalize your observations on the plan, as well as to present comments to the council.
Okay, so in truth, we don't have 120 days. In truth, we have significantly less. And so I think, that's further reason for concern.
Well, and we have even less because, as Larry pointed out, we have Christmas break. So, whether by design or inadvertently, that's minimized the opportunity for comment. I'd simply reinforce the need to really push this, and there's, I think, an additional reason that obviously this is going to be a very contentious sort of issue. We would like to believe that science is part of the foundation of it. If it emerges that scientific evaluation has been done in a half-baked way because of an arbitrary deadline on timing for it, that's going to come back to haunt everyone. And I think simply in terms of public perception and political reality, those are more reasons to really push this to a maximum time so that it can be done in something that isn't half-baked.
I feel obligated to put forth the minority opinion. Remember the red dots? There's nothing in the BDCP, although it'd be 25,000 pages, that's going to be new. Much of it has been presented. There may be a few details that change. We've known that this is going to be released in November or December for a long time. Everybody should have been gearing up for this, being prepared for it. The red dots aren't going to go away. The conveyance problems, the vulnerability in the Delta is not going to go away by waiting. We need to take action. I want to, again, it sounds like this is the minority opinion, but I want to encourage my colleagues to support the 120 days, to ask the ISB and those that have been charged with a very important responsibility to review this data, to do it as expediently and as efficiently and as thorough as possible. If we find at the 90-day period of time it simply isn't enough to do it well and to do it right, we can ask for an extension at that time. But to surrender to 180 days now without at least giving it a try, given all the advertising and anticipation and advance notice that it's coming, would be, to me, seem premature.
And certainly it's up to the council and the board what you want to request. Our suggestion is the same as Randy's. Our staff report recommends that rather than request a longer review period now, we proceed with the review, seeing how we can make it work. And if we find we've got serious problems later, I think then we would certainly be rethinking whether the 120 days is enough.
Well, why couldn't we at least advise resources? The scientists have raised this issue, Randy, that we can't get this done. Now, maybe they can get it done. I'm not suggesting you don't, but it's kind of we're going to in between here. But I agree with what you're saying. If they are put on notice, to me that's important.
Well,
I think there's been good reasons here to demonstrate that that's probably good. There's a basis for seeking more time. But we'll do the best we can. But I think they need to know what the scientists think, leaving aside what we think, what the politics think dictates.
As someone that just got 25 draft term papers to review yesterday, I remember that it takes very little time to review something that is very, very good and very, very poor. It's in that middle ground that takes the time to really sort it out and try to figure out, how can we make this better? So if there's a good summary reflecting that it's very thoughtful and they've done a good job, then I think we are likely to be able to do it a lot shorter time frame, than what we're talking about. And similarly, if it's really horrible, it won't take very long to review it. But I'm suspecting that it will fall in that middle ground, or at least many of the chapters and the sections will fall in that middle ground. So we'll have to see.
Randy, I think your points are really well taken. I think that one of the big crunches for us as the ISB is this effects analysis and having that available in some way. We can watch 2 days of video of a public meeting. That'll be helpful, but it won't be the same as having some hard copy or electronic copy of the report. And I think what I'm hearing, and I think what we would like to be able to deliver a product that we can stand behind and not deliver something that says, we did the best we could with a ridiculously low amount of time, so take it for what it's worth. And I wanted to go to Dick, since you've been sort of listening to all this and been involved from the very beginning with BDCP and how we're going to handle this as a panel, as a board, and the discussion we had yesterday with Arcadis. Where are you coming down on this? 143 days or what?
I'd love to have 120. Is this on?
I think it is.
It's on now. I pushed the red button 3 times.
Turns it off.
Yeah. If come December 13th we have beautiful 6-page summaries for each chapter, this is what's really critical in this chapter, that would make all the difference in the world. We have a committee, a board that has been looking at individual draft chapters. We have not, as a board, talked about what we're finding and sort of said, gee, is there a pattern emerging here between the chapters that we want to discuss as a board? So our charge in this table is, look at adaptive management in particular, but we're charged by the legislation to review the draft environmental impact report. And we're not, that's a wide open charge, which we could discharge very poorly, or we could do it well. We have not, as a board, done sort of what we're finding in each of these chapters. And partly that's because some of those chapters were going to be covered by Arcadis, and so we need their input in that process. We have 2 board meetings scheduled. One about 2 weeks after the effects analysis panel, but maybe 2 weeks before the report's actually provided. So that's mid-January. We have another one in late February. So the late February board meeting gives us time to actually look at a draft. We'd have to have a teleconference after that draft, probably, to send something to the council by early March, which I think is what you're asking for. Our board meeting after that is after the 120-day deadline. So we have 2 board meetings in which to exercise this in. And it would take a good board meeting to go from sort of our individual readings to sort of saying, what are we finding as a committee, as a board as a whole, what are we finding in this statement? And another good board meeting to really be able to begin to address the adaptive management question overall, which is mostly in the plan, not in the EIR.
Well, some of it may also be in the guarantees and the legal assurances that are going to be following.
Right.
That won't be out until sometime in January, right?
The implementation agreement will be available in January.
But we don't know when in January.
I was told early January.
Okay, so this is additional information.
Can I just make a suggestion? It will come as no shock to the Bay Delta Conservation Plan that the Independent Science Board is skeptical about the timetable that has been announced as giving them sufficient time to review it. I mean, we might get yelled at a bit, but everybody's telling them that. I mean, come on. How many of us have not been sitting in meetings where everybody's saying, give us more time, give us more time, give us more time? They have. Their job, of course, is to prod everybody who's demanding more time to promise to actually produce in a speedy fashion. I think if the Science Board has a kind of a summary statement you want us to forward to BDCP, first of all, note you can do it yourself directly if you wanted to, but if you want us to forward to it, why wouldn't we do that?
If that would be your choice, we'd be
Yeah,
happy to do it. It's
said-
not, they know this already. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not like the BDCP decision makers don't know.
Oh, no,
that
they are clearly...
we had asked for this time,
That's
and
right.
you all had as well.
Yeah, and my suspicion is, even if they said, oh yeah, you got 4 more months on top of it, we'd be still in the same puzzle because there will be important scientific questions that will, at the end of that period, not be fully addressed and explained, because there is no answer, there's never a point where you can answer all the questions that 38 million Californians can raise about a political dispute. But I have no objection. As a matter of fact, I think we owe a duty to the Independent Science Board. If they have a position to take, as Frank indicated, that we need more time, particularly when there's a separation between some of these documents and the release of, the December release, when other things are to follow and we don't know what the other things are going to say, well, just a flag, heads up, this is what they say, and their position is likely that they will not have sufficient time to review it, and just to let you know, that's their current position. What's wrong with doing that? Now, your position is you don't want the council saying, yeah, give them 4 more times or whatever. But we also, I predict, will have our own questions about time to digest the material, not just the Independent Science Board staff, but your stuff. You're going to give us more than 7 days to read the staff analysis of the DSC staff analysis of this?
Well, if we're on time, we would have 7 days to review it, yeah. But how about this then, Mr. Chairman? What if we draft a letter for you and Tracy that would convey this concern to the Secretary for Natural Resources, and you could send it out early next week?
Well, I'm fine. Look, it's fine with me. We're not asking to approve anything. First of all, the council's, they have to consult with us on BDCP by statute, where they've been doing it. We've been sending the letters out. I'd sign a letter. If you want the council to vote on the thing, we can do it at tomorrow's meeting. Draft it by then. Let us look at it. Okay. And I don't think, Mr. Stevens, I believe that we can communicate that without legal posting notice of draft letters and all that kind of stuff, because it's within our general authority to communicate to other agencies on a continuing basis. So I don't, why don't you guys do a draft overnight and let's talk to Tracy and let me take a look at it. We'll come to the council tomorrow.
Okay.
Is that
We'll
okay?
do that.
All right. This is the one where we quote Judge Damorell at length in the letter as prominent retired federal judge Damorell said.
We'll be checking the videotape to make sure we've got the statement correct.
I think this idea has come up already, that if we have to respond within a particular time frame, we can always provide interim comments. And then if we feel the need to, as these later products come out, supplement our comments and finalize them, then we can always do that. I have a little bit of, I have sympathy for both sides of this argument.
Yeah,
I certainly have sympathy for Randy's point of view in the sense that I'm not really anxious to prolong the agony of this.
Yeah, I think he was suggesting more than that. Supervisor? Okay. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, this is, by the way, this is pretty good, a nice illustration of, as important issues come to a head, there are increasing intersection points between the council and the Independent Science Board, and it helps to have these discussions, and if we can think through them in advance, it's going to make it a lot easier on all of us. And so one of the things that Mr. Knopf, hopefully you and Peter and Dan would work on is thinking through the relationship between the council and the science board, and a more explicit timetable of steps. At what point Arcadis is expected to produce something, and all of that. and we'll go from there. We've had 2 requests to comment before we take a break for lunch and then come back on the habitat report, if that's acceptable. By the way, members, just a notice, we're going to try to get out as early as we can this afternoon because Frank has to chair the Delta Protection Commission, which is meeting in Oakley, Contra Costa County. And it is the 20th anniversary of the Delta Protection Commission this month. And so some council members, myself included, Pat Johnston, who I think is speaking on the program because he was the author of the legislation that's going down there. So we'll have to move along right after lunch. Doctor?
Just a quick question. Now, the Arcadis report, that's completely separate, right? We don't have to wait for their comments or anything, and we don't have to look at them because we don't want to taint our ideas with theirs. So I would like to, I'm asking whether are we going to have a look at their report, or we are waiting for their report, or we just work independently completely?
Mr. Ray?
Well, your report would be your own. We're trying to arrange Arcadis's work so that it can inform your review as you consider what your remarks would be. But your judgment would be what would be critical to your own letter. There's some work that they're doing that I think in discussion with Tracy and others, it seemed like it would be useful that they're doing that maybe they could be helpful to focus you on issues that have raised concern previously, or there's work that they're doing that might be helpful to you as you try to think through some issues for yourself. But it's not like we're asking them to review your work or you to review their work.
Will they include a summary?
I'm hoping they're not producing 20,000 pages.
Well, the other thing is we were also given we were not given an unlimited budget, and so we tried to figure out ways in which we can share our staff and consultants to help the science board as well. And, other alternatives have been given us that would have been better.
I thought your suggestion of summarizing previous questions that have been addressed is a really good one. When might that be available? Because that will help us also.
Well, I think we're trying to get this task order ready so that they can begin work when the EIR and EIS is released in mid-December, and so they can get that as promptly as they can. We'll see.
How about by tomorrow you can separately tell the council in either an email form or are you guys meeting? You're meeting tomorrow at the separate meeting. The answer to that question: when can we expect the kind of summary of questions asked? Just so you can see the range of questions or issues that are out there that we collectively have raised.
Well, right now Arcadis is working, just trying to put together the task order that would allow us to focus them on this review. We could perhaps even with our own staff resources. Our own letter was, I think it was, it was like 18 pages long or something. So to break that out into a matrix that would allow you to see the questions that we've asked, that might take a little bit of time. Especially we're going to line that with your comments, and then again, part of what Arcadis has done that's been so helpful to us is they've been able to identify the key issues that other agencies have raised as well, and that's sort of one of the advantages of the place we're at now is that we've got sort of the best thinking of a variety of agencies, the federal government as well as the State Water Board and others that have looked at the EIS, and so I'd rather be able to do that comprehensively. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to promise something arbitrary that we can't deliver on, but we know it's important, and we'll be working with them to get something as soon as we can.
Okay, tomorrow we'll talk about it more. I'm not satisfied with sometime in the future either on that, because these are letters that go back from the council to 2010, so it's not as if they haven't been around. Anyway, but we'll talk about that tomorrow.
I just checked on our products, and from what I see, our first, ISB's first comment was June of 2012.
Yeah.
And we have a total of about 5 letters, so we could, among ourselves, we could summarize our concerns that are raised, and others could do the same, I would think.
Okay.
Tracy, can I ask you a quick question before lunch? One of the things that we've discussed is can we talk to the Arcadis people about how some of their interpretations, or do we have to wait till the official report comes out?
Dick and Dan, you want to comment on that, the discussion we had with Arcadis?
Well, as we're writing the scope for Arcadis's work, we're trying to make sure that they have time to talk with individual ISB members about the various chapters you're reviewing. But that's not unlimited time, and I think it's most useful to do once the draft EIS is on the street, and so you're talking about a product that's in front of you as opposed to trying to look back over your shoulder at a draft that may or may not be carried forward to the public review.
Yeah. Vince, I think the point is that we're trying to coordinate and put into the Arcadis budget time to spend time with individual board members and with the board as a whole. But just how that's going to work is not clear yet.
Mr. Knopp, what does our lawyer say about this? I only mentioned this. Mr. Stevens, you're sitting in the audience now, but this is a question that the Independent Science Board members wanted to know whether they could ask of Arcadis informally what findings they have temporarily made, or must they wait until the Arcadis report to the council is ready and available for review? I don't know the answer to the question. I don't know whether there are any issues legally that are involved, but if you could reassure us there are not, that would be terrific.
I can reassure you that I would think about it.
Okay, by tomorrow's meeting, Mr. Stevens will think about this request, which seems to me to be reasonable, and flag any issues for us by tomorrow. If there are any, we'll let you know, Dick, during your meeting tomorrow.
Well, and again, Chairman Eisenberg, we reviewed with Arcadis both the BDCP and the draft EIS and provided extensive comments on the administrative drafts, and of course those are available.
Right.
And as we work with Arcadis, we've anticipated them sharing their drafts as they're ready for anyone's review. We can do that with the ISB, especially individual members as they're reviewing different chapters.
Okay, two people have asked to speak.